My name is Sean Bertrand. I'm the director of the Red Team, and we're going to talk to you this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you're at in the world, about the Vulnerability Assessment Workshop. So let's get started here. What we want to cover from an agenda or curriculum perspective, we're going to get some definitions out of the way, making sure everybody on this call understands the difference between a vulnerability assessment versus a penetration test. And then what we want to do is dive into some of the specific methodologies or tactics that we leverage within the Red Team. So we're going to first talk about some of the active techniques that we leverage. Then we'll transition into the passive techniques. We'll make sure everybody on the call has an understanding of what the difference is between both of those. Then we'll transition into some of the tools and data metrics that we use on the Red Team. Those will cover both open source and enterprise-based products. And then what we're going to do is we're going to translate all those different things, the methodologies, the tools, the data metrics that we leverage in the Red Team, and we're going to translate that to how you can adopt some of those same principles or processes within a corporate vulnerability management program. So that's what we're going to cover today. From an introduction perspective, my name is Sean Bertrand. I've been at CBI for about 14 years. Apparently, I'm an overall great guy. I don't know who dropped that bullet point in at the last minute, but appreciate it. I am the director of the Red Team Assessment Group, and I have a strong obsession and passion with hacking all the things. So one of my, side projects or hobbies is to take products from security vendors and find vulnerabilities and exploits within some of those different products. And I've got a good, decent track record of doing so. So that's what I do in my free time. I want to pass it over to Charlie to talk a little bit about himself.
Hey, welcome to the webinar, everyone. My name is Charles Kroll. I'm a security analyst here as part of the CBI Red Team. Started off in the CBI Academy. It's our paid 12-week apprenticeship program designed to build out the skills for those interested in becoming an IT security consultant. We offer 3 tracks: government, risk and compliance, product specialization, and then Red Team assessments. I took product implementation and the penetration testing for my track. And one way we do that in the Red Team is through Tenable implementations, which I've taken point on. And it all started for me, with computer networking. That's how I got my start in IT and developed an interest way back in high school. And then I kind of graduated from the defensive side and the connectivity side into how we can leverage these things to use the offense to inform the defense.
Well stated, and perfect segue to talk about the Red Team itself, Charlie. So what do we do on the Red Team? Well, at an elementary level, the Red Team is offensive, Blue Team is defensive. So we are a passionate group of white hat hackers here at CBI on the Red Team. We have a specific focus behind some of these different tracks. So vulnerability assessments, penetration testing, social engineering, physical security, industrial control and SCADA assessments, as well as risk assessments and security awareness training. Our team is built off of veterans. It's built off of solid skill sets. These are skills that are acquired over time. We do have a very particular set of skills. And again, this is something that's been refined and focused over years of working with hundreds of different assessments and penetration testing projects throughout our journey here at CBI. One of the things I wanted to talk about, which sometimes it's easy to understand, in other cases it's not, was a little bit about the difference, or I should say the definition behind a vulnerability assessment versus a penetration test. And so one of the easiest ways that we can make this explanation is through a simple analogy. So a vulnerability assessment is the process of identifying and prioritizing vulnerabilities in a system, while a penetration test actually exploits those vulnerabilities to identify what the true impact is. How deep can an attacker go? How can they move laterally? How can they exfiltrate data? Those are some of the differences. And the analogy that I use is either, it's either the home or the car perspective. But if you take a bad guy and put the analogy forth that he is attempting to break into a vehicle to steal something inside that vehicle, maybe it's an iPad or an iPhone that's sitting in the car. The first thing that individual, that malicious bad guy is going to do is he's going to look in the window. He's going to jiggle the door handles. He's going to assess the situation. He's going to identify what that vulnerability landscape looks like. And that's what a vulnerability assessment is as well. We're looking underneath all the rocks, checking specific applications, looking at certain versions to identify what vulnerabilities may be present on that system. But we're not actually exploiting those vulnerabilities. And when the bad guy takes things to the next level, and I guess you could apply this from a penetration testing perspective, they're going to throw that brick through the window, right? And they're going to actually take that laptop or iPhone or whatever it is that they're after and walk away with it. And that's what we do on the red team as well. And I wanted to make sure the audience here understood the difference between a vulnerability assessment versus a penetration test. When we talk about vulnerability assessments and penetration testing, we talk about it with two different specific mindsets: active techniques and passive techniques. So we define anything active as any packets that we're sending to your environment or to your network that you own. So some of the things we're going to talk about, we'll start with enumeration. Enumeration is basically the process of identifying the active hosts within the environment that we're going to assess. We do that through a lot of different techniques. We're going to talk about some of the tools that we use in each one of these different categories. But here what we're trying to drive home is there's some type of information or communication that we are sending to our customer's environment. And those machines, those systems, those assets have to respond to the information that we send to it and return some type of a response. So that's considered an active technique. Enumeration, great example, would be a ping, right? At a very elementary level, if we send an ICMP request to a specific host, that host needs to acknowledge that request and then send back a response. That would be considered an active technique. Port scanning, another great technique. Identifying what ports, protocols, and services are available on the specific assets after we've ran enumeration tactics or techniques. Again, generally considered an active technique. Banner grabbing. So once we've identified the appropriate port that's running, our next step is to identify if we can glean any information based on the banner. So if we're running HTTP and we're running a specific version of Apache, we want to be able to see if that banner represents any version information or any other data that we would be able to gather and use to our advantage. When we get into vulnerability scanning, and we're going to be obviously talking about this moving forward here in depth, most certainly considered an active component to our assessment techniques. So here we're sending packets, we're sending queries, we're spending a lot of different stateful information across the wire, and we need our customers' machines to respond back, and that is obviously considered scanning. So if we see we have a version of Apache running a vulnerable version, a vulnerability scan might validate that by checking other areas within the protocol or within the banner or within the service to validate that indeed we have some specific exposure points on those systems. Password guessing attacks, another good example of an active technique. So when we're actually trying to run a specific brute force or a password guess against an authentication scheme, that could be something like Outlook Web Access, that could be an FTP server, an SSH server, a web application hosting up specific authentication schemes. That is also considered an active technique. And then fuzzing, URL brute forcing, this is where we're looking for specific subdomains or subsections of a website, looking to identify if there's any modules or sites that shouldn't be publicly presented or should have appropriate access controls in it. And when we run these fuzzing attacks or URL brute forcing, that is most certainly an active component. And so you can see some of the value from an active perspective, some of the information that we're able to gather. What we want to do next is talk a little bit about things from a passive technique and then kind of show how these two relate and how they translate into a little bit about the corporate vulnerability management program. Open source intelligence, something that's near and dear to my heart. So we define open source intelligence as any information that we could gather that isn't touching your network. So think of social media, think of DNS, think of dumped data breach, or password dumps or compromised sites. We use this open source intelligence to identify certain architectural elements of the environment. We're looking to identify anything that we can gather that could be used to our advantage in some of the subsequent tasks associated with the assessment. Mention things like DNS mapping. People don't often understand how beneficial what benefits we can gather simply by brute forcing some of the DNS records throughout the environment. And we'll talk about some of the tools that we use to do this in a little bit. But by being able to identify, SharePoint, OWA, remote access servers or solutions, gives us the capability to hone in and focus on what it is that we're going to go after. So, things that offer more critical or significant data points for us, we're going to go after, we're going to focus on, we're going to prioritize. Google hacking, another good example of a passive technique. So what we're talking about here, Google spiders and maps specific sites, and it tries to crawl the entire internet to identify certain structures and certain data elements so that as a user queries Google for information, Google provides back accurate results. Well, inevitably, what Google's also doing is able to capture specific vulnerabilities just based on the way that it gathers its information. So if you can imagine having a directory exposed or having just simple directory listings exposed, we can query Google to tell us what vulnerabilities are present on your network without even touching your network. And we do this quite extensively. Breach dump analysis. This is a big one for us. So as different sites get compromised, I think everybody may have heard of the LinkedIn breach recently over the last few days here, which now represents the biggest breach that we've seen as far as released credentials. We will, first of all, through our open source intelligence, gather a list of all the email addresses associated with our target's domain or infrastructure. And then we'll use those email addresses and query these different breach dump sites to determine if any of those users have had their password, compromised as a result of this specific breach. Now, what that does for us is a couple things. First of all, we want to validate that that user would be potentially using or reusing that password in the corporate environment. Generally, we don't see that too often. It's most certainly not to say that it doesn't happen, but we don't see it too often. But what it does do for us, most importantly, is gives us an example of what kind of logic the user applies within their password. And so we can find through frequency analysis that this specific user, based on the breaches and the passwords that we have exposed as part of those breach dumps, they like to use seasonal attributes, and we actually do find that a lot. They like to use passwords like spring, fall, winter 2016 with an exclamation mark at the end. We can apply that same logic in some of the subsequent attacks or the active techniques that we define, such as the brute forcing and password guessing attacks. Shodan. So for those that aren't familiar with Shodan, Shodan is a solution tool on the internet that basically attempts to crawl the entire internet, every single IP address that's available on the internet, and identify what ports, protocols, and services are running on those specific machines. And then this is a great example, again, of a passive techniques because we are querying Shodan to tell us what it has found out about your environment. And so we are not touching our customer's network in any way, shape, or form here, but we can still gather information and vulnerability exposure points. As trivial as, we're running we see port 21 open. Maybe there's a WSFTP server that's running on that box. And in addition, that WSFTP server is running, version 9.6.2, which is vulnerable to privilege escalation, remote code execution. So we can identify these specific vulnerabilities without even touching your network. And then packet captures, from an internal perspective, and we're going to talk about other passive techniques here moving forward. Packet captures can reveal a great deal of data for us on the red team. So when we look at ICS SCADA environments specifically, we're able to conduct passive analysis using port spans and mirrors to get Wireshark PCAP files, and we can inspect those using different tools. And again, without sending any active packets to these mission critical hosts, we can identify what some of the exposure points are within that environment. Okay, so that was a little bit behind active and passive techniques. what I want to do now is talk a little bit about some of the tools that we have in our arsenal and how those kind of mold to both the active and passive side of things. So one of the things that we use extensively in our toolkit is Nmap. Nmap is like the de facto standard for enumeration, discovery, port scanning, and it does a heck of a lot more than just that. And it's considered to be both an active and passive tool. We also use a great little tool out there called Fierce. Fierce is a DNS brute force tool. It's designed to take a domain and attempt to identify all the DNS-A records that are on that domain. And as I mentioned before, that's gold for us. We then have a good view into the environment of, again, what some of the critical assets are in the organization. You see things like ERP or SAP.domain.com. I mean, my eyes open up quite considerably, as you can imagine. From an open source perspective, Maltego is one of our go-to tools as well, especially from a passive intelligence gathering. Maltego is designed to look at certain sites, identify social media characteristics, and using some of the input and the configurations that we apply to Maltego, it can provide us a great deal of information on a company and or an individual themselves, which we then obviously use in some of the other subsequent attacks that we have. We've got a lot of custom scripts that we develop on the red team or custom code that we use. We use active tools on a web application front, such as Burp Suite. It's a really good but manual-based web application tool that we leverage. Metasploit auxiliary modules. So everybody or those that aren't familiar with Metasploit is what I would consider kind of a point-click-shoot exploitation kit. For anybody that's involved in assessments or red team activities, most certainly have a strong familiarity with Metasploit. Well, there's some things outside of just the Metasploit framework that are called these auxiliary modules that we use as well too, which provide us information and capabilities to do things that other tools don't provide. And then two of the real strong tools that we're going to talk about here today in our arsenal is Tenable Nessus and Tenable PVS. Jumping right into this, I'll just start off with Nessus here. I've been in this industry a long time. I've been at CBI for 14 years, probably maybe 15 or 20 involved in InfoSec. And I strongly believe that Nessus is absolutely, without a doubt, the most reputable scanner in the industry for some of these reasons. First, it is extremely cost effective. There is an endless array of options that we leverage on a day-to-day basis on our red team, such as compliance scanning, being able to scan for malware, having customization to some of the policies, and having a limited amount of false positives makes our lives a heck of a lot easier. We have most certainly dabbled in all the other tools and vulnerability scanners that are out there. And these statements that I just made were based on, years of experience with those different tools across the spectrum. One of the cool things as well with Nessus that we'll talk about is its ability to interact and integrate and correlate with Security Center. And we're going to talk about what Tenable Security Center is, but for our red team, it gives us the capability to scale, gives us the capability to centralize this data. We often run engagements and vulnerability assessments for big, huge, large enterprise organizations, global, environments. And as such, scalability, centralization is important. It's something that Charlie will be talking about here soon. So what I wanted to do here was just briefly show you a couple viewpoints on Tenable, on Nessus itself, and kind of just put some pieces in front of you here to understand how we use it. I mentioned the ability and the advantage that we have for custom policy development. So here you can see some of the custom policies that we've developed over the years. And the ability to come in and modify and tweak settings based on differences in our customer's environment is huge. So we have the ability to use things like TCP UDP modifications when we're looking at port scanning. We can identify certain things like turning off web application scanning if we don't want it. We can tweak and tune the amount of packets that we're basically sending to our customers so that we can be evasive in certain cases if we need to. And then with the information that we get back, here's a great just little snapshot of some demo data that we're looking at. We can see some of the vulnerabilities that we've identified as part of this scan. But for us, that's not enough. We need some better abilities to work with this data. So what else Nessus provides is it gives us some really solid filtering capabilities. So by being able to filter for vulnerabilities that have remote code execution or have some exploit vector available, it's fantastic for us because we can then prioritize, we can then identify things from a more impactful perspective, and that obviously translates into a prioritized roadmap that's based on some of those variables. I can even go one step further. I can say, hey, show me all of the vulnerabilities that have Metasploit payloads associated with them. And it can come down, it'll actually come down and tell you exactly what that payload is. So then we can take that information, fire up Metasploit, find the specific payload, and go to town. From a scanning perspective, there's a lot that comes right out of the box. So you can see we have all these capabilities to scan for policy compliance auditing, malware, PCI, some specific vulnerabilities like shell shock or bad lock, all out of the box, which for us is great. It's very plug and play. It makes our lives easier when it comes down to actually configuring these things, kicking off the scans, and providing the efficiency that we need. All right, so that is a little bit about Nessus. I'm going to pass it to Charlie now to talk a little bit about PVS and then Security Center. Go ahead, Charlie.
Thank you, Sean. So we've got our active techniques and we've got our passive techniques. And in some environments, passive techniques are the only way to go. One way we do that is through the passive vulnerability scanner. Non-traditional in nature, for the most part, as information security professionals, we're used to the ad hoc solution, point and click scan, actively touching devices, whether that be a ping through an ICMP request, or as Sean had mentioned, a port scan. But in this case, perhaps we're in a situation where we can't touch these devices. Perhaps we're in a situation where we're dealing with ICS and SCADA devices, typically very sensitive devices that can't handle active scanning. So we turn to the PVS, and one way we enable this functionality is by connecting the PVS to a span port or a tap. We get network captures, copies of that traffic, which is then analyzed, as opposed to actively reaching out to these devices. So this is excellent for situations where we've got PLCs and ICS equipment that can't be actively touched by a scanner, but we need some insight. We need to see where the attack surface lies. In addition to the ad hoc nature of a lot of the point and click solutions, one of the great aspects of PVS too is it's always listening. As long as the solution's on and it's connected to that span port, it's always listening, providing you that continuous real-time view into the environment. One thing we need nowadays more than ever is context and action, as opposed to more data. And PVS can certainly provide that sort of insight, something we definitely use throughout the ICS and SCADA engagements. So with that, I just wanted to jump into quick demos to show you guys what this would look like from a console perspective. So the first thing we'll see here is the monitoring page on the Tenable PVS. This is going to provide that real-time, continuous view of what's going on in the environment. You'll see here a couple of the dashboards, top 5 applications, top 10 talkers, things of that nature, and this is all updated in real time, always giving you some sort of insight in terms of where you're at from a vulnerability perspective. And then you can see here, fully customizable as well. In addition to placement, we can create our own dashboards. We can filter this information down to a specific time frame, once again, giving us some context. And as you'll see here in a moment, we can even create our own using a lot of the similar filtering techniques that are found in Nessus. One of the great things Tenable has done is they've taken that great HTML5 interface from Nessus and transitioned it into their other products, making it a very seamless experience for customers and for us as Red Team members. And so that's exactly what you're seeing here. Those are the various dashboards that are actually baked into the product from the start, just to get you guys going. And then as well as the opportunity to create things from a custom perspective. So you can see here, creating a dashboard specific for the top 3 critical vulnerabilities in our environment. But the options here are endless. If you want to look at specific hosts, if you want to look at things from maybe more of a metric standpoint, such as the CVSS scoring system, that Tenable uses to rank their vulnerabilities. Certainly an option here. All right, and then transitioning from the live action section, the monitoring page. In a moment here, we'll take a look at the results, giving us a more holistic perspective in terms of where things are at. So there's three options here. We can essentially deploy PVS on a network span or a tap, as I mentioned before, to get that continuous view into the environment. But PVS also gives us the option to upload packet captures as well, and certainly something we've leveraged in the past where connectivity to these sensitive environments is fairly limited. So if that is the case, we can certainly upload that information as well. And then here we are, we drill down into it. PVS will identify the hosts, whether it's on the port span or the packet capture. It will identify the vulnerabilities in the same format we're used to in Nessus here. Again, using that CBI scoring system to rank the vulnerabilities. We can certainly take a look at the applications and client connections, which we'll get into in a moment here. But once again, we can drill down, just like in Nessus, and get that thorough, methodical insight into how we can go about addressing these vulnerabilities, what they entail, perhaps some of the vectors these vulnerabilities are exploited, and then there's also pertinent industry information baked right into the vulnerability. So you can see there, we can click the CVE and get full information. All right, and then transitioning from the vulnerabilities, if we want to just look at specific applications, we can certainly do that here by clicking the drop-down. As we can see here, this guy has a bit of a browser issue on Google Chrome, lots of Google Chrome stuff going on. And then we can go into client connections as well. So if you want to take a look at where your hosts are reaching out to, which devices they're talking to, which ports they're talking to, certainly excellent information in terms of establishing some of the trust relationships that are going on. Perhaps we detect one of our hosts has been compromised, maybe communicating to a botnet on a unusual port out of nowhere. PVS will provide that kind of information for us. Transitioning to the vulnerabilities section, we can transition from simply looking at individual hosts to looking at the environment more holistically. We can transition to a holistic perspective from applications. You can see here we've fingerprinted a couple of devices running IIS. Moving down, we can transition into just operating systems, giving us an idea in terms of where we're at from an asset management standpoint. And then we transition into connections. Once again, taking a look at the trust relationships and the types of connectivity going on, server and hosts, ports and protocols. And then finally, I think a lot of our environments nowadays are experiencing mobile workers, mobile devices, devices that are on and off the internal segment and a flash. PVS will also fingerprint mobile devices such as iPhones, as well as tablets, things of that nature. And once again, just like Nessus, we have all the solid built-in reporting features. We can do HTML, whether it be vulnerabilities by plugin, an executive summary for leadership, or CSV format. So we're going to export one of those for you and give you an idea of just what that looks like. And there you go. Same exact functionality. We can drill down into these vulnerabilities just as we would through the Nessus console and distribute these accordingly to our security team.
Great stuff on PVS, Charlie. I wanted to add one thing. For the longest time in this industry, we have struggled in assessing the areas in which availability trumps confidentiality and integrity. So those that are familiarized with the CIA triad, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, it's usually, for most of us, confidentiality and integrity are the priorities, but not in the ICS world. Availability is king. And so we struggled as a group collectively to find a solution in which we can at least gauge awareness into these specific environments. And now we have it. And we on the red team leverage this in primarily really two industries that are really popular is healthcare and ICS data. So obviously healthcare, crash cards, all these different high availability systems in there. Most people who work in healthcare understand that just trying to bring up the discussion of conducting vulnerability scanning on these hosts oftentimes just gets shunned, if you will, like don't even talk about that stuff. And the same thing in the ICS space. A lot of these manufacturing systems, power plants, pipelines, they've got machines that are running 10 years without a reboot. And the same kind of mentality from up top is if it ain't broke, don't touch it kind of thing. So now we have this ability to not only gauge awareness, to just identify what assets are out there and what vulnerability exposure they have, but specifically being able to drill down more from a CVSS perspective, prioritization, and even in the PVS space, a great deal of ICS SCADA information that we can get, including things like Modbus, coil information, what type of software and firmware is running on some of the specific devices. Overall, it's been extremely beneficial to us here on the Red Team. Go ahead, Charlie.
Thank you, Sean. That's an excellent point. And a great caveat into the security center portion. So I think we can all agree nowadays the amount of data that security professionals such as ourselves are dealing with is growing, and the resources to deal with that information is slim. When we look at Nessus, when we look at PVS, when we look at assessments, we see that each and every day. And so one way we try to unify that information to provide context and action to the teams and to our customers is through Security Center. So for those of you who perhaps use PVS or Nessus, or maybe both, and are looking to maybe leverage this across the enterprise, Security Center allows you to manage and centralize that information and that tool interaction from one console. In addition to that, I think a lot of environments nowadays, they have a lot of siloed solutions, whether it be firewall or SIM. Security Center ties into those things. For example, the Palo Alto firewall being one of them. We can use Security Center, leverage our Nessus scanners, and scan those things for misconfiguration audits. We can collect the logs to help supplement or augment the asset management portion, and also take a look at the syslogs and compare that against the other information we're receiving across the environment. So what does this provide? Context. We have, like I said before, we have so much information and we're looking for those needles in the haystack. The manual method isn't working. We need something to crunch those numbers, provide that analysis, and Security Center does just that. It ties in those active and passive sensors across the environment. It also introduces things such as ticketing. From a leadership perspective or a security program manager, you can assign tickets to the analysts or the individuals who have the direct configuration and hands-on roles within the corporation. It assists with providing patch management solutions. We're talking from a program, a strategic perspective. We'll get the overall view of what's in the environment ranked via the CBSS scoring system we've seen in the previous solutions. And ultimately, that's going to lead to faster remediation. And it's going to provide that information in an actionable format. And we'll see that here in the demo. Primarily, what Security Center does is it provides this information to us in dashboards. There's roughly 450 of them baked in right out of the box. They're released on almost a daily perspective without any additional configuration needed. These things align to things that are important to us in the security industry, whether you're trying to align to a security standard such as OWASP, or you're more fixated on the SANS one control inventory of unknown assets. Dashboards will provide that context and that actionable in an actionable format for members of your organization. One reason we use these passive and active techniques on our assessments and why we recommend them to customers is they really provide two things for them. First and foremost, asset discovery. You can't secure what you don't know exists in the environment. And we accomplish that with PVS, we accomplish that with Nessus, and then we scale with Security Center. And then that all ties into vulnerability management. So now we know what's on the environment, what's on the corporate network. We know what vulnerabilities are present. We have the context for which ones we should address first, and now it's time to take action. So let's go ahead and dive into this a little bit here. So first thing I wanted to touch base on is the scanning interface, the active scanning interface. So just like Nessus, we have the exact same layout. So for those of you who are currently using that solution, you'll feel right at home. Once again, just like with PVS, exact same layout. We have a slew of policies that Tenable has baked right in, whether you're looking to do a ping sweep, You're looking to do just a quick assessment of what your attack surface looks like on the internal segment. Those things are all present, and you'll see that here. We've got our host discovery through ping. We've got port scanning, whether it be TCP, UDP. We've got our SCADA plugins, brute force with integration into a tool we use in the red team called Hydra, web application scanning. And then, of course, we can also leverage credentials as well to provide even further information on the host we're scanning. And one of the great things about integrating Nessus in the Security Center is, in addition to the ad hoc kind of scans you run from a vulnerability management perspective, Security Center gives you the opportunity to schedule these and take immediate action. And nowadays, it's necessary for automation. Everything can't be done manually, and Security Center definitely leverages our existing scanners to run scans at a scheduled time, and then take action automatically through either sending reports, relaunching the scan based on the output it receives, and things of that nature. So now we've transitioned into taking a look at the vulnerabilities discovered by Security Center. It comes with a handful of nifty tools right out of the box. We've got the filtering capabilities, as we see here, just like in Nessus and in PVS. Once again, providing us that quick and immediate context into what we're looking at in terms of our environment. So you can see here we're sifting through the medium class vulnerabilities. If we want to take a look overall from a holistic severity perspective, we can certainly do that here. And then finally, if we want to look at an IP perspective, whether that be in the HR LAN, the server LANs, things of that nature, we can see all of those vulnerabilities across the environment in one page. Saves us a lot of hassle. Instead of having to export information from multiple solutions, which could be very time consuming, provides all of that information for you just in one pane of glass. And then as we dig deeper here, we get the exact same thorough information provided by the Tenable solutions. All right, and with that, I'm going to pass it back over to Sean to talk about a little bit about reporting.
Thank you, Charlie. One thing I will mention here quickly as well is the information that we get from both Nessus and Security Center allows our red team to take the appropriate actions in the amount of time that we have. And so a couple notes on that. First of all, we on the red team don't have an infinite amount of time like the bad guys do to hack environments. We are defined and controlled by a scope of work with a finite amount of time. So being able to leverage these tools in the most time-effective way is essential for us, and that's why we together and collectively landed on the Tenable framework versus all the others that are out there for that reason and many other reasons. But a good example is with the medium to low severity findings. So for those that aren't on red team, one of the things that we have found over the years is there's gold in them there hills associated with low to informational severity issues. It's not always the critical and high severity issues that represent all the risk to your environment. What we find is that if you pair together a few of those low to informational type severity findings, that you can graduate those attacks from something with low impact to critical impact. And it's Nessus, it's PVS, and it's Security Center that gives us that view, allows us to do the filtering and the correlation, as we've showed you already, that allows our team to react in the time that we need to react. So customization. Now, we've showed you a lot of capabilities for customization within Security Center itself. Here's just a little view on how we then take some of this information. Very elementary is prioritization. So we want to turn some of this information into some visual representation that have our logo on it, our look, our feel, and we can easily do that with Security Center and the ability to export some of these reports. So being able to provide some visual representation through things like a business impact matrix, to being able to do trending and linear forecasting is essential to us and our team, and as such is representative of why we use Security Center, PVS, and Nessus. So we talked about a lot here in the last 45 minutes. What I want to do is Let's kind of close things up here, summarize what it is that we talked about, make sure we've resonated and focused in on some of the points that we did discuss here. First of all, we've shown you a lot of tactics, some of the tools that we use, and some of the analytical and reporting mechanisms that we leverage as well. And we feel as though a lot of those different things that we showed you can be adopted into the corporate vulnerability management structure, whether that's something as trivial as a script or a tool that we showed you here today, or something as strategic or tactical as Nessus, PVS, and Security Center. Those are things that we leverage and that we're helping our corporate customers, whether that's an SMB who consists of 1,000 employees or a Fortune 100 that consists of 100,000 employees. A lot of these different tactics and techniques that we talked about have some level of relation to your corporate vulnerability management program. Listen, the passive data perspective and the value of being able to look at things without touching critical components within a high availability infrastructure is huge. We, as I mentioned before, have struggled with this as an industry for the past decade, especially in the healthcare and ICS SCADA environments. And now we have something. Finally, we can leverage it. We can build awareness, which obviously helps contribute to our vulnerability management program and dealing with how we react and respond to the mitigation path for some of these critical environments. Offensive tactics to defensive tactics. So we talked a little bit about some of the things we do from a red team perspective and how those can adapt to changing the way you configure your controls or countermeasures. Really easy example is talking about things that we port and probe and the way that we do so, and you have the capability to tweak and tune your firewall ACLs. We do a lot of things on the red team that translates to our clients making changes that prevent that from happening in the future. And as such, we've hopefully talked about some of those areas that you can take today and do some of those very same things. Centralization value is huge. In a large environment, in a global environment or a very scaled environment, being able to deploy scanners and deploy these passive tools and then have them report back to the mothership, which is Security Center, is huge. We can control scanning schedules. We can digest that information from a central perspective and correlate that data from a central perspective, which is instrumental when it comes to trying to manage the intricacies of a vulnerability management program for a large environment. Actionable data, Charlie mentioned it, talked to it as well, by being able to leverage some of those dashboards within Security Center and having reports delivered, and then some of the filtering capabilities that I showed you within Nessus gives you things that you can take immediate action on based on the risk, the impact, and the level of mitigation effort associated with some of those different vulnerabilities. And then lastly is using Nessus as a catapult. I would say 9 out of 10 customers that our red team performs engagements on, they already have Nessus in place because it is cost effective and it provides the most value out of all those other different scanners that are out on the market. So 9 out of 10 at least, or 9 out of 10 roughly, have Nessus already in the environment. And those customers are great use cases for those who are looking to accelerate or enhance their vulnerability management program by then incorporating some of those different other solutions such as PVS and Security Center, because really you've already built some of the foundation within the environment. You're already likely doing some scanning and have begun to take some of those steps. Imagine the ability to now take a solution like Security Center and PVS and dramatically accelerate or enhance your vulnerability management program as a result of that new value that you can derive as part of those products. And that's something we're seeing a ton of success in. And what's important there is these customers don't have to worry about, investing the farm, so to speak, because these are cost-effective paths that provide huge value to the organizations themselves. A great example is with Security Center, specifically with some of the licensing we provide, or Tenable provides unlimited versions of Nessus and or PVS so that you can deploy those throughout an extremely large environment. You don't have to worry about getting nickel and dimed like with some of the other vendors that we're used to dealing with. And so that's straight from the heart. This is based on my experience with Tenable, products that we've used, and really the fact that it has been an instrumental internal tool in our toolkit across the board, whether it's PVS, Nessus, or Security Center. And so hopefully we've applied some of those concepts and showed you some of the different ways that you can leverage those tools as well as some of the other Tenable tools. What we would like to offer to anybody is the ability to talk to us. So if you want to just send us an email, or if you really want to get a little bit more formal or interactive, we most certainly are available to jump on a call or meet locally if you're in the area. But it's something that we offer to a lot of our customers and to a lot of our attendees of the webinars. So let's talk. If you want to take this to the next level, or you just want to ask us some questions, we're here to do just that. And so you can reach us on the CBI_info alias email address that we have up on the screen, or feel free to visit our website at www.cbihome.com. You can browse around, find some information, and go from there. But we'll certainly appreciate everybody jumping on the call this afternoon, and looking forward to any next steps that you'd like to move forward with.